Hey YouTube, this is Arceus13 again, and today I wanted to discuss the multiverse. Now, this is going to be completely theoretical and partially narrative based, but it's an idea that's been rattling around in my head and I want to let it out somehow. So, in a story I'm writing, there are it's really hard to angle my fingers to the camera properly. There are three different types of dimensions in the multiverse. There are prime universes, anti-prime universes, and strange universes. So think of the Spider-Verse. Strange universes are going to be places like Spider-Ham's world. Meanwhile, yeah, you know what? How is that How is that better? Meanwhile, prime and anti-prime universes are going to be closely related. The anti-prime universes and prime are prime universes with variations. For example, well, Dimension G in my story is a gender-swapped universe. One thing to note is that the veil between anti-prime and strange universes is very thin. One can have a human doppelganger or who's of the same sex as you are in both dimensions. The only way to tell the difference would be constellations. The prime universes and anti-prime universes evolved on two different paths, as though still closely related. And so all prime universes have similar, or if not the exact same, constellations. Anti-prime universes would also share constellations, although it would be a different set than the prime universes. Strange universes would all have their own unique constellations as they all evolved completely differently. Unless, of course, a strange universe evolved the same way that prime universes do. And that is going to be the crux of the video. Now, so the prime universes are all pretty much one universe, but with different timelines. Now, think back to the show Loki. The TVA was tasked with keeping the sacred timeline from branching and causing a multiversal war. The different prime universes would be those branch timelines caused not necessarily by variance, but by chance. The old graphic novel, meanwhile, puts it rather well. Take a coin and flip it. For me, it landed on tails. No. Okay, I can't show it to the camera. And I still can't. Hopefully that's enough for you to tell. Now, for me, it landed on tails. However, there is some timeline where instead it landed on heads. And if you flip it again, there we go. Then the universe splits again. And here's a question. And here's a question for you to ponder, and for me to not answer it. After 2 coin flips, not counting all the bloopers that I may or may not keep in, but like after 2 coin flips, how many universes are there? 4 or 3? Now, the thing is, something as simple as flipping a coin probably isn't going to have too big an impact. However, the choices that are made as a result of coin flips can make a huge difference. Now, this demonstration probably doesn't. The coin flips that I did for this demonstration probably wouldn't have much difference. However, also in the book, meanwhile, when the scientist was discussing this, it was in the context of a machine that can kill every human in the universe, or that's outside the machine at least. Why you'd make such a thing, I don't know. However, if the machine read a coin, detected that the coin was either heads up or tails up, it would activate. I forget which one it was, but if it was one way, it would activate. If it was the other, or it wouldn't. The other day, though, I was thinking about this further. How would events on Earth dramatically affect the whole universe? And the answer is they wouldn't. And now I am going to dip into actual science and introduce to you a concept called a light cone. And that is not a light cone. There's going to be a graphic like right here. Now, for any event that occurs at a point in space-time, there exists a light cone as expressed by this diagram. Everything inside the cone below the point are events that could have influenced that event. And everything inside the cone above the point, those are events that event A could have influenced. Now, the boundaries of the cones, these 45-degree angles, those are a representation of, that is a representation of the speed of light. Whenever an event occurs, a timeline splinter occurs as well, creating what I'm calling a splinter bubble. That spreads out from that event at a speed of roughly 300 million meters per second, which is roughly 1.8 billion kilometers per hour, or 671 million miles per hour. In case you're unaware, that's the speed of light. Now, outside that splinter bubble, there's just one timeline. But once the bubble hits, there's 2 timelines. To be fair, most of the events are not all that important. And if the change is minimal, the bubble may eventually collapse, so that nothing's different except the splinter event. That would be points like this coin flip. 3 tails, okay. However, things change when the splinter event has more of an impact. Medium-sized splinter events may create satellite dimensions. These satellite dimensions would be the same as their parent in dimensions, save for small changes caused by the splinter. However, Although, if one of these satellites has enough medium-sized splinters or leads to a massive splinter, then it becomes a branched dimension. Massive splinters are major historical events, the kind that alternate history hub would talk about. Change those events and you create another dimension. Let's look at an example, shall we? Let's think of our universe, our timeline, as Dimension A. While I was trying to come up with examples, my first thought was the fall of the Roman Empire. The splinter event would have been in it collapsing at a different time. But that leads to another problem. There can be many different splinter timelines depending on when it falls. Then I decided to settle on another splinter event, and the assassination of Julius Caesar. I think I was trying to do alternate history hub Cody. I don't know. I am not good. I can do some impressions. This is one I'm pretty good at. But other ones, not so much. What the hell was... Now, we know how it went in our timeline. On the Ides of March, Julius Caesar was assassinated by several senators, as well as his own friend Brutus. However, in the splinter event, Caesar doesn't die. Perhaps the assassination attempt never comes into fruition, or maybe it was just that, an attempt. Either way, Caesar lives through the Ides of March. I think I was dipping into Richard Nixon there. I am not a crook. Now, with the splinter event, both scenarios happen. Where one... yeah, I am not going to try that. I'm not going to go any farther. I'm tired. I have not had my afternoon medicine. Now, with this splinter event, both scenarios do happen. One where Caesar died, which is Dimension A, our timeline, and one where Caesar lived, it's Dimension B. What happens in Dimension B, I can't say. I'm not a historian, and the butterfly effect would be real. So, all that I can say is that Augustus not coming into power when he did might cause some alterations. And with an altered Roman Empire around when Jesus comes along, the course of Christianity, it would be changed. So, if I have timed the release of this video right, it would to be released on the Ides of March, there would be a splinter bubble with a radius of exactly 266 light years spreading out from Largo de Toro, Argentina, the spot where Caesar was assassinated. Now, looking at these two timelines, there are many other places where they can splinter. The collapse of the Roman Empire, the Black Death, the voyage of Christopher Columbus, the list goes on. And Dimension B would also have several events that I can't predict without knowing how that timeline goes. However, let's focus on a certain event, World War I. Focusing only on Dimension A, World War I really could have gone either way. While the Allied powers won, the Central Powers could also have won. And while the events of the war would have to have gone differently, I'm not going to focus on those events and instead just focus on the outcome. Dimension A is the timeline and where that we know where the timeline and that the Allied powers won will remain Dimension A. However, the timeline where the Central Powers win will be labeled as Dimension C, since B is already taken. The splinter bubble for Dimension C would have a radius of about 103 light years and would be centered somewhere in Europe. With the unknown events of the war, I can't tell you where the peace treaty would be signed in Dimension C. It might still be in Versailles, might not. But what about Dimension B? Well, let's say that World War I still happens, even with the untold events following Caesar's survival. With the unknown alterations to Europe caused by a change in the Roman Empire, the countries of Europe would be completely different. But that's for fun. Let's look at a possible timeline for Dimension B. Julius Caesar rules for another 10 years after the Splinter event before dying. Maybe he's still assassinated, maybe it's a natural death. Augustus still takes the throne, though those 10 additional years under Julius have changed the empire. Jesus still comes along and is still crucified, and Christianity still spreads. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Roman Empire is still split into East and West. What happens on the Asian steppes are not greatly affected by the timeline change, so barbarians come in and attack the western half of the empire. The Western Emperor realizes he can't win militarily and thus decides on diplomacy. Most of the holdings in France and Germany are given up, while much of the African territory is lost to the Arabs. Well, maybe not the Arabs. I'm not a historian, but some group still takes the African territories. Over time, the Western Empire erodes to the Alps, but Rome never loses control of Italy. While it can no longer be called the Roman Empire, the Roman state, while it may go through several governmental changes, would still remain until World War I. The rest of Europe would be different. The Viking expansion still happens, and the history of the Byzantine Empire would be similar to our timeline. When it finally collapses and Europe is cut off from the spice trade, there may still be a Christopher Columbus who discovers, the New World, and colonization kicks off. One colony rebels, and their... Excuse me, why am I so gassy all of a sudden? One colony rebels, and there would still be a growing power in the New World by the time of the Great War. And in Europe, there may still be figures like Napoleon. That sounds like a rejected... That sounds like an evolution. Napoleon. There may still be figures like Napoleon or Bismarck. By the time of the Great War, there may be a country like England in the Isle of Great Britain, though they would never unite with Scotland. There would be a country that controls half of modern-day France and half of modern-day Spain, Francospanha. There would still be a Portugal that controls the rest of Iberia, and there would still be a Germanic country as well as Russia. While the exact alliances aren't important, one side would be led by Germany and the other side by Rome. The war starts on the same day as in Dimension A and would end on November 11th, 1918. Both sides have a more or less equal chance to win the war. Again, let's have the splinter event occur at the end of the war. B, let's have Dimension B be the timeline where Rome wins, and the timeline where Germany wins, Dimension D. So, now we have 4 dimensions. There's the world we know, Dimension A, one where Julius Caesar was never assassinated and Rome won World War I, Dimension B, one where Caesar was assassinated and the Central Powers won World War I, and Dimension C, and one where Caesar lived and Germany won World War I, Dimension D. World War I, World War I, World War I. Sounded like a broken record. Ah! So here's a graphic that I prepared earlier. Yes, it is Desmos graphing calculator. I don't know how to use. It was the fastest thing I could find. Like, as you can see on, like down. I am in a bit of a time crunch, so hope I may come back and try and get some more professional graphics, but whatever. But anyway, I prepared this as a demonstration of the like timeline in Splinters. It's like, and like, well, how the bubble, well, rather how the bubbles expand throughout time. So every like 0.01 is a, and here is a single year, or because it would be way too big if I did one for a year. So I paused it on like 32 AD, but 0.43, if we zoom in very far, we do see that there is a tiny splinter bubble after, or caused by the death of Caesar. Now, hold on while I reset the zoom. Now, as time goes on, that splinter bubble gets larger and larger. And we are about to hit the other splinter bubble. Now, one thing I need to say. Let's say that outside this splinter bubble is like just the outside this splinter bubble is the unaltered timeline. And like A or prime or whatever you want to call it. Inside it's 2, A and B. Now, continuing on, and we see, and there's the bubble caused by World War II. This is, okay, now caught up to present day. It has a radius of about 104 years, while this one is 2066 years. Now, okay, and that is it for the demonstration of the Earth timeline. And this video ended up being a lot longer than expected, and so this is going to be part 1. I still need to edit more of it, so the rest of it. So yeah, check back in for that whenever it comes out. Hopefully it comes out. That was a big, better flip than I was expecting. But let's try that again. If you flip it again, let's see how many times it takes for me to get this right. If you flip it again, if you flip it again, I'm gonna run out of coins. If you flip it again, if you flip it again, if you flip it again, that doesn't even sound like a phrase anymore. Oh, this is gonna be a fun blooper. And if you flip it again, damn it, if you flip it again, no idea why I slipped into that voice or why I wrote that whole paragraph in that voice, but okay. This video is going to turn into me doing as many impressions as I can, isn't it? Rest of you? No. What voice was I trying to be? What? Rest of Europe would be. No. What? I think that was a bad Joey Wheeler. The West.